afternoon. I'm Suzanne Borden, Moment Magazine's Zubinar producer. Moment is pleased to host today's program, A Tale of a Nagoon, with Elie Wiesel and Mark Podwal, to honor the memory of Elie Wiesel, who co-founded the magazine in 1975 with writer Leonard Fine. The song you just heard is called Niggun Baal Shem Tov and sung by David Margoliot. Elie Wiesel is a recovering Wall Street executive who raised millions of dollars for New York's neediest by convening hundreds of finance professionals to stay up all night solving elaborate puzzles on the city streets. Having retired from a 25-year financial markets career at the end of 2019, Elisha then served as the technology lead for digital marketing in the Mike Bloomberg presidential campaign. He used his time in quarantine to learn Metallica songs on guitar from his son, to learn TikTok dances from his daughter, to organize his father's archives, to learn a little Talmud every day, and to obey his wife and mother. When his father passed, Elisha realized that many others missed his voice, and so he now speaks from time to time about his father's legacy and message when the right opportunities arise for impact. Mark Podwal is an acclaimed artist whose works have been exhibited and published worldwide. Initially known for his drawings for the New York Times op-ed page, most of Mark's books, his own as well as those illustrated for others, including such luminaries as Elie Wiesel, Harold Bloom, and Francine Prose, focus on Jewish subjects. His art is represented in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Israel Museum, among many other venues. Author Cynthia Ozick has given Mark the Hebrew name Baal Kav Emet, or Master of the True Line. In 1996, the French Ministry of Culture named Mark an Officer of the Order of Arts and Letters. In 2011, he received the Foundation for Jewish Culture Achievement Award, and in 2019, the Czech Foreign Ministry awarded him the Gratias Agit Prize. Additional honors include the American Book Award and the National Jewish Book Award. Joining Elisha and Mark today is Nadine Epstein, Editor-in-Chief of Moment Magazine. Nadine is also the editor of Elie Wiesel, An Extraordinary Life and Legacy. Please welcome Elisha Wiesel, Mark Podwal, and Nadine Epstein.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Nadine.
So Yom HaShoah starts Wednesday, and poems are a microcosm of experience, imagination, and memory. And we thought we would take a long narrative poem that was written by Elisha's dad and Mark's friend and my friend, Elie Wiesel, and that would be a powerful lens to sort of on the unspeakable, the genocide of millions of Jews and millions of other people during what we now call the Holocaust, or Yom HaShoah, the Shoah. And we could do this because Elisha and Mark collaborated on a beautiful book. It was published last year by Shockin that brings the poem alive. And it's called The Tale of the Nagoon. And it has an introduction by Elisha, art by Mark, and the words of Elie Wiesel. And I know all of you haven't actually read the poem, so I wanted to ask Elisha to start by reading the first 7 stanzas, I think, up until the rabbi's conundrum, if you could, so we could sort of feel the poem a little bit as we speak about it.
I feel like I'm at a Seder table with you, Nadine, and we're all going to go around reading segments of the Haggadah here.
I promise not.
A ghetto, somewhere in the east, during the reign of night, under skies of copper and fire. The leaders of the community, good people all, courageous all, fearing God and loving his law, came to see the rabbi, who has cried and has searched darkness for an answer with such passion that he no longer can see. It's urgent, they tell him. It's more than urgent. It's a matter of life or death for some Jews and perhaps all Jews. Speak, says the rabbi, tell me all. I wish not to be spared. This is what the enemy demands, says the oldest of the old Jews to the rabbi, who listens breathlessly. The enemy demands 10 Jews chosen by us and handed over to him before tomorrow evening. Tomorrow is Purim, and the enemy, planning to avenge Haman's 10 sons, will hang 10 of our own, says the oldest of the old Jews. And he asks, What are we to do, Rabbi? Tell us what to do.
Thank you. Mark, I was wondering if you could just give us a little, kind of a brief synopsis of the poem, just so we know what happens as we talk about it.
Well, I really don't want to say what happens because, that's the whole point of the ending. But what happens is the rabbi is in distress. He tells the members of the congregation who came to him that he'll have an answer for them the next morning. And all night he consults the spirits of legendary rabbis, including Rashi, the Baal Shem Tov, and the Vilna Gaon, and the Baal Shem Tov teaches the rabbi of the shtetl, the nagoon, that maybe the nagoon will intercede with God to save the population. And so the next morning, the rabbi tells the population that he has to give 10 names, and he teaches the nagoon to sing, for the congregation to sing. And I think it's better not to continue. Okay.
Well, how about you tell us a little bit about, maybe everyone doesn't know, but what is a nagoon?
Nagoon is a Jewish melody without words.
Okay.
A lot of bum, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum, and so on.
Okay. We heard a little bit in the beginning. We were playing a nagoon, and we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes.
Although it was accompanied. So
you're right.
Full experience of an unaccompanied nigun.
Okay. We'll save that because we're going to talk about nagoons. So much now has been written about the Holocaust, in part because of Elie's really nurturing of survivors' voices. But back in 1978, when he wrote this poem, there was much less written about it. And I was thinking he was about 18 years after he wrote Night, after it was published in English. He was about 50 years old. You were about 6 years old. And we'll talk a little bit about how this poem came to be written, but he was asked to contribute something to a book. So why do you think your dad wrote this poem? What was he thinking in 1978? What did he, first of all, did he write poems often? And what was he thinking about?
My father didn't write many poems. As I've been going through his archives, I found many different manuscripts, but only a handful of things that could be songs or poems. So it was relatively rare. And it's also rare that my mother, I don't think, remembers translating this one. So he may have written it directly in English, which also makes it a little unusual. You ask me what was on my father's mind when he wrote it, and originally this was meant to be a tribute to Wolf Kellman, I believe. It was part of a collection of pieces to honor him. The only thing I can say is, and I never got to speak to my father about this piece, if you think about when it was written, it's very much of a piece with my father's belief in Jewish unity. I think that may be the overpowering theme. And 1978 is a period of time between when The Jews of Silence was published, which was all about Jews in the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Jewry movement really hitting its peak. So we're somewhere between the germ of an idea that my father had when he went to visit the Soviet Union and found these Jews who were being oppressed, not allowed to practice their faith. The title of The Jews of Silence is an admonishment of Jews in America for all that we weren't doing to help our brothers and sisters in the Soviet Union. And then, of course, by the mid-'80s, the Soviet Jewry movement had reached a fever pitch. You had the March on Washington, that John Lewis attended. You have an incredible movement that was building out. Sharansky was visible. People knew the names of refuseniks. And I think this piece is in between that. It's in between those two moments.
Do you think that the poem is actually based, as you mentioned in the introduction, on actual events in two shtetls? And do you think that your dad maybe learned about these events while he was there in the Soviet Union? or heard about them? And also, could you tell us a little bit about the events? I know you researched them a little bit.
Sure, there are events that did take place in certain towns where, this concept of Jews having to choose, who would be killed was conveyed. But it's not like it was some new invention, I think, of the Nazis in the 1940s. If you even read through some of the origins of prayers, you'll find stories going back to Roman times, of when the Jews are asked to betray each other. And it's interesting. We just read recently. I read recently about a particular piece of Talmud where it's discussed that there are two non-Jews who are praised because they went to their deaths rather than allow a Jewish community to have to make choices like that. So I think that the concept of creating this fictional miniature Jewish agency where all that we get to decide is who dies in what order. I mean, think about the entire experience of the Warsaw Ghetto. Think about Chernyakov and what these people were asked to do. These people who ran the Judenrats within the ghettos. This was all about finding, can you minimize suffering somehow by finding some way to sequence how Jews are to experience pain and death. It's all a terrible choice. And I think whether it was the specific events in these towns, whether it's linking it to Purim or not, this is unfortunately a situation Jews have been in.
So this is one reason why it's important to think about this poem on Yom HaShoah. Let me just pause a second. You mentioned Moshe Kellerman, and actually I realized that he was a leading conservative rabbi and a Jewish leader, and he was a contemporary of your dad. And also I realized he was the father of Levi Wyman Kelman and Nama Kelman Esrahi, who was the first woman to become a rabbi in Israel, who's a Reform rabbi. And I was just wondering, did your mom know him too? I saw he marched with Rabbi Abraham Heschel and Martin Luther King in Selma. And I know your mom was very involved in that.
My mom definitely knew Wolf Kelman. I don't know much more than that. We should have her on these things. She's
actually,
has a lot more to offer.
Next time we will do that. That's a great idea. So Mark, you were close to Elie for many, many years, and I'm wondering why you think he never mentioned this poem to you or to anyone else, at least that we know of.
No idea, but at one point in the 1980s, I was asked to illustrate all of Elie's books.
Mm-hmm.
It wound up, 16 wound up being published in leather limited editions. And Elie said, "Oh, I feel so sorry for you. You have to read all of these books." And so I illustrated them. When I first was told about this poem and I was asked to illustrate it, I had no idea that it represented events in the Holocaust. I thought this was Elie doing a poem based upon the martyrology that's read on Yom Kippur, where the Romans say we're going to kill 10 Jews in revenge for the 10 brothers of Joseph who sold him into slavery. So that's what I thought inspired Elie. Only later, when I read Elisha's introduction, did I see that this happened during the Holocaust.
Which brings me to, how did this poem ever even get discovered? I'm not that it was a loss, because it sounds like some people knew about it, but how, Elisha, did you discover it?
I was solicited, I think, either directly or through my father's agent, the estate's agent, by a man named Michael Pomerantz, who is a bookseller in Jerusalem, who had come across it in this book of essays for Wolf Kelman. And I think he realized that this was an overlooked treasure and reached out to us about republishing.
So let's talk about, we're going to talk about the art soon, but let's talk about the poem a little bit. It's really a moral dilemma that it's a nightmare that every person grapples with. What do you do if you're thrust into a position to decide who lives and who dies? And this poor rabbi is. Actually, my dad, who died a few weeks ago, I recall him telling me he turned down being an officer in the Navy, even though it was a better job, because he just never wanted to be in the position to make this decision. And So I know we didn't talk about the decision that he made, and we should talk a little bit about the process of making that decision too, because I think the poem is really largely about the process. But do you agree with the decision that was made? And I think maybe we should say what the decision was.
Well, the decision, well, oh, how do I share this? I just disappeared.
What do you want to do?
Can you click on your Zoom in the bottom? Yeah.
Yeah. I clicked on share screen and then I didn't appear. But is that what I should do?
We have you.
You are still there. You're still there.
You're here.
So you can see me?
Yeah, but we don't, if you want to share your screen again and show the picture.
Do I show images?
Not yet. How do I?
Stop.
Well, we're going to look at the art.
Okay, there I am.
Okay.
So the decision is not to give the names of 10 Jews, but that everybody would be massacred by the Germans. And Elie never calls them the Germans, he only calls them the enemy. And he never says where this is. It's just somewhere in the east. And so the rabbi will not give 10 names. And so the entire population of the ghetto is massacred, singing the nagoon that he taught them. And with the singing of the nagoon, Jews from previous centuries come to join in the singing. And that's how the book ends.
So it's a unity of Jews over time. All the many of the historical figures and rabbis all come and are singing, are there too. I guess, it's a really incredibly hard decision. And, there's so many other options, you could arm everyone with pots and pans. You could hide everyone. You could burn the village. 10 people could volunteer to die.
Or you could do what we do today.
Which is what?
Fight endlessly.
Okay.
I think in some ways, my father's deepest dream is represented in this concept of Jewish unity here. Look at us today. You could imagine the religious Jews at their most extreme saying, who needs the completely secular Jews anyway? We've lost them to Judaism. So you know what, who cares? You can imagine the secular Jews saying, to hell with these religious Jews. They're nutcases anyway. That's not the future so what do we need them for? Let's give up on them. You could imagine, the Bundists having said, or the Satmar having said, let's give up. There's a couple of these Jews that are Zionist Jews. They're crazy. They want to start their own country again back in Palestine. Let's get rid of them. What do we need them for? It's only trouble. Or you could imagine the Zionists saying, look at all these Jews who hate Jewish power. They're so conflicted over Jewish power. Who needs them anyway? Let's be done with them. Look at the way we fight today. There isn't an axis that matters, whether it's Jewish practice or our belief in the future of the state of Israel, of which Jews are not slinging mud at each other across social media, printed media, the sermons that are given in shuls of opposing viewpoints. It's of all the things that I think saddened my father, it's when he saw our people do that to each other each and every day. And I think that this, in some ways, is one of his most powerful expressions of Jewish unity. Jewish unity, even when it feels painful. Jewish unity, even if it means we're all going to go down together. And look at what happens across the generations in the final passages of this poem, how not only across political perspective or region or ethnicity, whether it's Mizrahi or Sephardi or Ashkenazi, it's across time as well. And Jews of all the different centuries coming together. I think that in many ways, this is how my father visualized the Jewish people.
So what do you think his message was to us in this poem?
I don't know that there's just one. I'm sorry.
So the message is unity. That's what you think he's trying to.
I don't want to be reductionist on what I think is a beautiful piece, and I want our listeners to become readers and each let each of them walk away with what I think the message is. But I think that there are layers of messages. I think that there are messages touching on the theme of unity. I think that there are messages touching on the timelessness of the Jewish people. I think that there are messages about the power of music to transcend time and space. I think that there are messages about what it means to wrestle with a moral dilemma and to consult one's teachers. It's a multi-layered piece that packs so many punches in such a short, slim volume. I find it to be one of my father's most powerful works, frankly.
So let's talk about the process, because the process of how this decision gets made, the rabbi made decision, is something ultimately very Jewish, where he really is going back through, he's reading all these books and he's consulting the rabbis in his mind or through their words or communicating with them in some way. And is that a uniquely Jewish process, do you think? Or was that your dad's process in some level about how to wrestle with questions?
I think it's a very Jewish response. I mean, what are the two words you hear? Tsei ulmad, come and let's learn. And I think, I have an image of my father with, always with a Chumash open or a Talmud open or a text open. My father, believed in books, and he was always consulting the books. I don't think that this was something that was left in case of emergency, see what the previous generations had to say. Mm-hmm. I think for my father, living every day was, what did the previous generations have to say? And I think by living a life where that was such a resonant part of who he was, he has earned, in a sense, becoming part of that generational landscape that, now we are turning and seeing what he had to say to inform our own lives. And hopefully we're not waiting for a moment of emergency to do that.
So do either of you feel, I feel very frustrated when I read the poem also, that this decision was the one that was made, because there are other decisions that could have been made. Could they have been made Jewishly? We right now we're in this period where we're talking about how there were many Jews who defied the enemy and fought back. And even in the introduction, you sort of refer to this.
Yeah, no,
it's incredible frustration. I'm like, no, don't do that. Fight.
That was my first reading. My first reading is, I had all these voices in my head. Where's Mordechai Analevich, determined to take some Nazis down with him, as Warsaw burns, leading the resistance. Where's the IDF? But my father, that's not the piece that my father was going to write. And my father was not a military author. He wasn't a spy author. My father was someone who lived by teaching and by learning. And so I think the hero of the story exists to teach and to learn.
When you mentioned about burning the ghetto to the ground, my mother's shtetl, Dąbrowa Białostocka, when the Germans came in, someone in the town killed a German officer. As a result, the entire town was burned to the ground.
I guess I was thinking of it in terms, the Jews could have burned the town too. There are all these other options that are just simply not considered. But it's true that they are not the options that maybe Elie was thinking about, or that wasn't his message. His message is about learning and also continuity. So the continuity of Jewish thought and consulting back through the ages, the sages through the ages, which is so beautifully done in this book, which brings us to the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov has a kind of starring role in the process. And I'm wondering, did Elie have a special attraction, a special interest in the Baal Shem Tov?
Well, of course, he wrote the book Souls on Fire. Mm-hmm. The first character is the Baal Shem Tov. And he loved to tell stories about the Baal Shem Tov.
Which brings us to the Niggun itself. So the Niggun itself is from the Baal Shem Tov. I don't know. We actually were playing a little piece of music in the beginning, which was from the Baal Shem Tov. I have no idea if this is a actual Niggun that Elie's referring to that's in the book, or whether it is one that he simply imagining?
I would think it was one that he imagined because it would be this all-encompassing melody.
I agree. I don't know that he had some specific one in mind.
Mm-hmm. So I guess what was it about nagoons that made them so important to Elie? Because it's something he spoke about. It's something that he obviously meant a great deal to him.
It's something that he did.
Yeah.
It's something, I mean, I can't tell you how many times at the dinner table, all of a sudden you'd see my father sort of nodding off, quietly humming something to himself, listening to some music that was coming from somewhere else. My father lived in a space of nigunim. I think that was just part of where he lived.
Also, Elie liked to conduct. And he told me that he had the opportunity, I think, to conduct the Boston Symphony Orchestra and then decided not to.
Why?
It was probably on Shabbos.
Stage fright, I don't know.
I think he did some other performing there that he seemed like he did happily, but
he performed some of his Vishnitz nigunim, I know, with Mati Lazar on for the 92nd Street Y concert. Mm-hmm. and he's recorded before with cantor Debbie Katchko Gray, one of his students. So I know he's recorded some of his nigunim.
Someone just mentioned that he wrote a cantata. He wrote a cantata, but the music was composed by someone else. He wrote Ani Mami.
Mm-hmm.
But we also did a whole actual program on his music, some of the music that he sang, which included the three of us, which was wonderful. But we didn't really talk as much about the nigunim. And I guess I was wondering, Elisha, how old were you when you first started noticing that your dad loved nigunim, that he was singing them and what they were? When did he teach you? Did he teach you some?
It's funny, the earliest nigunim I learned with him that I can remember were actually not quote unquote nigunim. We had this old vinyl recording of the Russian army choir singing Russian songs that were wordless. And I still remember those, and he used to love that. He would be, always singing those. And I don't know if there was some particular resonance because I don't know why, but I remember that from extremely early age. But in shul, where he would really get lost and be transported, I think is, at Fifth Avenue Synagogue when Cantor Malovani would be, going deep into some, musical exploration of a nigun. That's when I would see him really happy, which is so interesting because, by the way, Ashkenaz tends to not have that much of a focus on nigunim, to be honest. Like standard, conservadox davening, there's not that much room for nigunim. There's a lot of davening, but not so much nigunim. He actually, I think, would have been much happier, davening in a Hasidic shul, in a shtibel where there was more of that. But I think, for various reasons that my father davened in a more conventional Ashkenaz. Now, there's nothing conventional about Cantor Malovani in particular, but in general, I think my father did not get to be in the Hasidic shuls that he probably had in his mind.
I don't think there are Hasidic shuls in walking distance, like the Fifth Avenue Synagogue.
Yeah, depends how far you want to walk.
Well, also, I guess he was very involved in music. I mean, people forget that, growing up, he was, sang, he was in a choir, he then taught choir. So I think he had a real connection with music.
Absolutely.
True? Yeah.
He would be, it's funny, every so often I would be humming to myself, and it might have been a punk or a hardcore song or a heavy metal song, and he'd be joining in and he'd be humming along. I'd be like, Dad, what are you humming? And he's like, oh, you're singing Hasidic Nigun, aren't you? And I'm like, not quite, but it was nice because little moments that we're humming along with each other.
That's wonderful. So Mark, this book, you learn about this book, you read this poem, and you have to come up with a way to illustrate it, to portray it through visual imagery. And it's a very sad story, and although it has its happy moments, but you choose not to illustrate it in a literal fashion. And I'm wondering, what was your thought? Why did you decide not to literally illustrate it?
Very simple. I never illustrate anything literally, ever. And so when I illustrated Harold Bloom's book, Fallen Angels, he called them illuminations, that they shed light on the words. They enhance the words rather than just mirror them. So I can show you some of the images.
I would love if you could give us a little tour of some of the images and what you were thinking when you created them.
Sure.
You have to share the screen first.
Where?
Minimize this.
Suzanne, do we have some of them as well that we could put up on the screen?
Out and
Okay.
Just make sure you don't accidentally show Freud's Da Vinci.
I can. It almost lost me an exhibition at the Jewish Museum. And Playboy had published it in one of their magazines. But anyway, so there are 10 drawings, 10 paintings on paper. And I'm very honored that these 10 paintings on paper will be exhibited for 3 years at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, beginning in September, in their own room, as part of a Holocaust exhibition by Robert Jan van Pelt, leading Holocaust scholar. So the poem begins with a ghetto somewhere in the East, and it's about Purim. So I have the image here on a Megillah telling the story. This is an example of a Polish wooden synagogue or Ukrainian wooden synagogue, the Humantashen, and to enclose the ghetto, there's the barbed wire. Now, because the 10 Jews who are to be executed, it's in revenge of the 10 sons of Haman who were hung. This is a Megillah scroll with the names of the 10 sons and the 10 sons being hung. And this was actually collaged from a Megillah. And this is a German standing behind. It's with his hat with the death head.
I noticed that throughout you use skull and bones imagery.
Well, because I tried not to do anything gruesome, but to identify the Germans on their caps, they had skulls and bones. So it was just for, authenticity. These are the 4 legendary rabbis that the rabbi consults. And I was thinking, as I was just looking at the cover, when illustrating Elie's books, he told me, he gave me 3 things that I should never do. I should never have Hebrew letters just for decoration. I should never draw the victims of the Holocaust. And I should never draw the Maharal in our book, The Golem, because nobody knew what he looked like. So here, this is a portrait of Rashi, which nobody knew what he looked like, but based upon traditional images. This is the Vilna Gaon, who there are many portraits from his lifetime. And then with the Baal Shem Tov, there are people who believe there's a portrait of the Baal Shem Tov, but the portrait of the Baal Shem Tov is the London Baal Shem Tov. There is no portrait of the Baal Shem Tov. And these are all the books that the rabbi consults. And so to do the drawings for this book and not literally tell the story, Elie really doesn't discuss Purim. So my images deal with iconographic images from Purim. So Purim masks. So here's Achashverosh, his crown is Humantashen, and this mask is a Nazi. So I reproduced this image on the door to my medical office that says, "No mask, no entry." And so I've had patients say, "Oh, I want that. I want to put that in my child's bedroom." I said, "This is a Nazi. I don't think that's a good idea." They didn't notice it. Because Purim will not be celebrated, the noisemakers are broken.
Oh, okay, go back and tell us a little bit more about that.
So
there's so many noisemakers. I actually, when I looked at it, I was trying to figure out they're all noisemakers from
they're all traditional
era?
noisemakers.
Yeah.
Mainly from what you'd see in Eastern Europe.
Made out of wood.
Made out of wood. And this is the part that would make the noise. And they would go around. And so in looking for a thing of images for Purim, certainly noisemakers. And so they're broken because Not that the Nazis broke them, they just won't be used.
It also has a feel of broken bones somehow to me.
It does.
Well, what's happened is when
They've been silenced.
there are times when I'll do a drawing, and a drawing is also based on what you're thinking unconsciously, not just what you're thinking consciously. And there are times when someone has a better description of what I drew than what I had in mind. This is the image for this. There's a sentence, the rabbi dreamed he was somewhere else. So in thinking, where else would he want to be? So here he is in Jerusalem. And what identifies it as Jerusalem is the Mosque of Omer.
And the colors too.
Yeah, and so it was, and how did I picture the rabbi somewhere else? I didn't literally have him walking through Jerusalem, but here he looks out the window and he's not in the ghetto, he's in Jerusalem. And so here's a Torah crown, but a German SS hat is resting on the crown, and in the back is a parochet. So in the poem, when other generations come, I have traditional tombstones with traditional Eastern Europe iconography. And instead of stones on the tombstones, there are shtetls.
Wow.
And then to picture the nagoon, there's barbed wire as the music staffs, and there's the music notes of the houses of the shtetl. And then someone asked me, why don't I do a bass clef here? And it's because the treble clef is a much more interesting image. So then for the last image, there's a broken Torah shield with Purim, because there are times when Torah shields would have a slot and you could put the name of the holiday in it. And so instead of having the, for Yuda or for Juif in French, I put the musical notes because their six-pointed stars were transformed by the nagoon. And so those are the images.
Wow, thank you. Those were beautiful.
Thank you.
So,
the book was supposed to be actually published, not in November, but then in spring for Purim. But I worked pretty quickly, and when I told Alti Karpa, the editor at Shockin, this is all going to be done very soon, they were able to move it up for November.
I actually originally saw the book in Alti's office. Alti is an editor at Random House, and she showed it to me, and it was a beautiful book, and it always stayed in my mind that we wanted to do something on this book. So I guess why either of you, here we are, it's why this book, why this poem, why it's important to today to remember Yom HaShoah. Is there something that comes to mind, Mark?
Why is this book important for today?
Mm-hmm.
Well, with the rise in anti-Semitism and with the lack of any knowledge of the past by many people, there was some poll to see how many American high school students ever even heard of Auschwitz or the Holocaust. The results were pitiful. Unfortunately, these stories are always appropriate, and these are subjects that I continue to work on. And it was a great honor that Elisha and Marion, asked me to continue my tradition of illustrating Elie's books.
Do you actually have the book, Elisha, that the original book that the poem was in?
Yeah, it's right here.
Oh, wow. And this was published in the United States? It looks like something that's on my parents' shelf at home.
Yeah.
It looks like a book I've seen many times, but perhaps not really noticed.
Yep. Copyright 1978, the Rabbinic Assembly.
And did you actually find, I know that you didn't see the book. Originally, the book came to you from someone else who knew about it, but have you found this book on your dad's shelf?
I haven't gone hunting for it. This particular book I found in the theological halls of eBay.
Okay. So there are so many people I see there's so many people who have questions. So
I want to, if I
yeah,
can,
go ahead,
before we get to
please.
theirs, I'd like to answer the question you posed to Mark on sort of its significance. And I think that as much as it has significance in the face of all the ignorance of anti-Semitism and what has been done over 3,000 years to our people, I think there's another element of this piece as well, which is one of the other great enemies of the Jewish people is ultimately assimilation and us just disappearing of our own accord. The idea that it doesn't matter anymore, that the next generation doesn't feel a connection to the Jewish learning or to the Jewish prayer or to Jewish thought or to the Jewish people. And, you know, that's its own set of risks. And what I love about this piece is for every Jew who says, but, you know, I don't want to pray, I don't know the words, or if I say the words, they're meaningless to me, or if I read them in Hebrew, I don't know what they mean, or if I say them in English, it sounds Baroque and doesn't come off my tongue. I think my father is saying that there is prayer here that transcends words. And there is an ability to be connected to our people in a way that transcends words. And that, I think, is the power of a Niggun in answering that particular risk to the Jewish people.
Also, I think after Elie passed away, that there was this thirst for more writings from him, which people were not aware of before. He has a huge amount of writings that people don't know about, but to publish a book after his death, I think is something that many people will find of significance.
And it gives you further insight into him and what he was thinking. Yes, the Niggunim are so powerful because they are prayer without words. And a lot of people, by the way, they have questions, but a lot of people want to know how to purchase the book. Let me just remind you that I think you can purchase the book anywhere books are available. Random House is shocking, and it's available at bookstores and online retailers and museum libraries. So wherever you like.
Nadine, I put a link in the chat to the Random House website, and then from there you can find it purchased there and other places.
That's wonderful.
One other thing I know a lot of people were asking for the entire poem to be read, but you really need to get the book and see the beautiful illustrations. And it's not just a short one-page poem that could be read today. It is a full over 40-page book that has the poem for folks to read. So I'm sorry that we couldn't read the whole thing, but you'll enjoy it once you get the book. And
there's also a glossary, which was really helpful because it sort of identifies who all the rabbis are who are referred to in the book, in the poem, which I think is very valuable as well. So there's so many questions, and I thought perhaps we could get to a few of them.
One person wanted to know, Mark, what was the reason Elie did not want you to draw Holocaust victims in any of the illustrations you've done for him through the years?
Great question.
He never gave me a reason. And maybe he thought that nobody could do justice to drawing them. In reality, I think I once read by Susan Sontag that without the photos of the camps when they were liberated, no one could imagine how horrible everything was. When you're just told about it, when you see mountains of emaciated bodies, it's something you couldn't imagine. And so there were the photos. There was no need to, no matter what I would draw, trying to depict the victims, it wouldn't be as powerful as one photo.
Elisha, isn't that one of the reasons why your dad never wanted to make films out of his books? He didn't want
I
to
think
have...
my father didn't want any other creative interpretation between him and his reader. I think my father felt he had a very intimate relationship with his readers, and that he wanted to speak his testimony, and he wanted his readers to witness it and hear it, and he didn't want anyone else intruding in that relationship.
Mhm.
I'd like to add something that when Elie wrote the introduction to my catalog for my first exhibition at the Prague Jewish Museum, the closing sentence, which moves me whenever I read it or say it, was, "Such is the power of this artist. He captures what death has forgotten to take." And of all the sentences Elie wrote about me, that sentence just moves me the most.
There are
Thank you.
there's some wonderful questions here. Do you want to share them, or should I share a few?
Well, one question is, I'm going to combine two. What was it about the poem that you wanted to have made it into a book with beautiful illustrations?
Was that a question for me?
Either of you.
Well, there was no question that we would get Mark to do the illustrations, and I think it was a slim enough book that it felt it would be enhanced by it. I don't know, that just it seemed to be a sensible thing to do. And the poem, to me, I think what was most urgent about it is I wanted people to read it. I felt that there was a message of hope and Jewish continuity, despite the terrible outcome that happens to the main characters. There was a feeling of connectedness to Jewish history that reading this poem gave me that I felt might be a more direct route. In every conversation I have with people where I try to get them to understand how important Jewish continuity and connectedness is to me, all those words felt pale compared to this story that my father had produced so many years ago.
And what do you think was the reason that Nigguns touched him so much, more than songs that had words? And somebody also asked, is it the same as humming, and how is it different?
First of all, there are many different nigunim for different occasions. There are nigunim that one sings at Simchat Torah that are songs of joy. There are niguns you'll hear at Hasidic weddings that are, that are when the wedding, when the bride approaches, and they're all different. And there are Chabad nigunim, and there are Vishnitz nigunim, and they have consonants as well. So it's not just humming. I'll give you an example. I heard the Chabad, sort of bridal nigun for the first time a few months or years ago when a friend of mine's daughter was getting married, and da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 da. So there's a recurrence to it that pulls you in, and it's not just humming. Whether it's you have the d sound, the die, or if it's a l sound, it's accompanied with consonants. It's not just humming, and certain nigunim become connected to a certain moment in the liturgical year, or in the life cycle, or is it a moment of joy or a darker moment? Anyway, that's an example of a nigun.
I'd like to tell a brief story about Elie in a wedding. Elie would sometimes call me the last minute and say, "Come with me to this wedding in Brooklyn." Or one time he called and said, "Come with me to the Lubavitcher Rebbe's funeral." So I go with Elie to the wedding of his friend, Rabbi Menashe Klein's granddaughter. And we're standing around waiting for the chuppah. And someone comes up to Elie and says, "Professor Wiesel, what brings you here?" And before Elie could answer, I said, "The food." Elie was hysterical.
That's very funny. That's very funny. But there's something about the nigun that I think, if you look at, when I bring people, I've had friends come join me to daven at the Carlbach Shul on the Upper West Side, which is my, I may have plenty of rabbis listening. It's one of my favorite shuls. I don't want to overly prejudice towards it. But it's amazing because it lives in the Niggun. And I have friends who I've brought who are totally disconnected from Jewish practice. I've brought friends who aren't even Jewish. And, 20, 30 minutes in, they're sitting there nodding along, singing the Niggunim as well. The access is immediate. It welcomes everyone. You don't need a lot of knowledge beforehand.
Are there any recordings of your father singing some Nigguns that people have access to?
There are. As I said, there's a DVD that I think still sells of the 92nd Street Y. That's on Amazon, and I believe that, I don't know whether Cantor Debbie Katchko-Gray has ever released anything. She certainly shared it with me, and there's some beautiful recordings with her and that are out there.
And I will share that tonight, Debbie is sharing some of those recordings through, I'll try and put a link in it. Debbie, if you want to send me the link, I'll put it in for people if they want to watch that program this evening.
I know there are other, I saw one question that, if I can just jump in, Nadine and Suzanne, if that's okay with you. I saw one question asked in a number of different ways about, couldn't the rabbi in the story just have given the 10 Jews to the Nazis, and then when those were done, give the next 10, and maybe that ultimately saves some lives? And I want to read you a very famous speech given by Chaim Rumkowski, he ran the Judenrat in the Lodz ghetto. And this is a very famous speech. And he says, "A grievous blow has struck the ghetto. The Germans are asking us to give up the best we possess, the children and the elderly. I was unworthy of having a child of my own, so I gave the best years of my life to children. I've lived and breathed with children. I never imagined I would be forced to deliver this sacrifice to the altar with my own hands. In my old age, I must stretch out my hands and beg you, brothers and sisters, hand them over to me. Fathers and mothers, give me your children." If there is a point of damnation, I think, in the story of the Shoah, this is certainly one of them. So that is the alternative, I think, that the rabbi was facing. Very famous speech, the "Give me your children" speech.
I mean, again, I mentioned this earlier, is that there were other alternatives, but they were not part of the narrative of this poem.
In reality, they would all die anyway, even if he gave the 10 names. The ghetto would be liquidated. They would all die. They didn't know it, but that's what would happen.
I guess the alternative is to die fighting.
Yep.
Well, yesterday, I was watching, or 2 days ago, I was watching an interview about the Auschwitz exhibition, and that's at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And someone mentioned that before they would shoot the Jews and their bodies would be hurled into the pits, or they would fall into the pits, they'd have everybody undress. And it wasn't just so that they could take their clothes or the bodies would rot quicker. It was just, once they've undressed everybody, they've so humiliated them, the chance of them striking back at that particular point, when there might only be 200 German soldiers and 2,000 Jews, just may have made it more difficult.
I know we're short on time, Nadine and Suzanne, but may I share one more small story? And I promise you I'll be done with enough time for you to close. There's also some element here that it just reminded me, this concept of prayer rather than battle. When in 70 CE, just before it, when Jerusalem was falling to the Romans, there were certainly adherents among the zealots, the Jewish zealots, who said we have to keep fighting till every last one of us is dead. But Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai faked his own death and was smuggled out of the capital city in a coffin. And he went to Vespasian. And when he emerged from the coffin, he had a vision that Vespasian would soon be emperor. And what did he ask for? He didn't ask for a continuation of, Judaism as a political state. He knew that for the moment that would be done, and was until 1948. He asked for a place in Yavne where he could start a school and study Torah. And he asked for one of the great Rabbanim to be able to join him. And ultimately, it was through prayer. That's how Judaism survived. That was the critical moment of adaptation where, you know, en masse success, where we're not going to defeat our enemies physically for that moment, but we were going to stay alive as a tradition and a way of being and thinking and praying and studying.
Thank you. Nadine, do you have anything else that you wanted to add?
There were so many other questions, but I think we've run out of time. So somebody wanted to know, how does this connect to the story of Masada? I guess the question is, how does this connect to so many Jewish stories? And I think Elisha just gave us a taste of that. Is there anything that Mark or Elisha you'd like to add before we close?
Book's a great gift.
Mark, folks would like to know if you could mention again where your pictures from the book will be exhibited.
Currently, the exhibition at the Museum of Jewish Heritage is Auschwitz. And the curator, Robert Jan van Pelt, is doing an exhibition on the Holocaust that will open up September in the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And months ago, he contacted me about collaborating on the exhibition. And the first thing I suggested was exhibiting these works from the book. And it was agreed to, so they'll be in their own room for 3 years. And then I'm now doing a project with him for the Baba Yar Foundation. But so hopefully they'll be there in September.
Yes, that's in New York City.
Yeah, down by the Battery.
Yes. So one other question that really popped at me was, were there a particular reason why you chose the colors in the images?
What happens is when I sit down to do a work, I never sit down without the idea of what I'm going to do. But the idea is always in black and white. So I outline it, then I have all these colors, and I go to this one, I go to that one. It just works. But I didn't start color until around 1995. For decades, I only worked in black and white and was too intimidated to work in color. But when I did my first children's book, the contract I insisted would be black and white, but the art director said, try color. And so I did a work in color. And then my son, Michael, who was a very good artist, he was about 12 years old. He comes home. I said, what do you think of this?
Mm-hmm.
He said, I wish one day I can paint like that. So that's how my color career began.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Elisha, is there anything you would like to end with?
Just a big thank you to Moment Magazine.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Well, a big thank you to both of you for creating this book and sharing this poem, very important poem, with the world. We very much appreciate it. I know our audience appreciates both of you joining us today. Again, the link for the book is in the chat, along with the program that I mentioned earlier that's happening this evening through the Zamir Choral Foundation. Also, you can go to our website, and as Nadine mentioned earlier, in September we did a beautiful musical tribute to Elie, and you can watch that recording. It does include several songs of him singing as well as others singing in tribute to him. You can also on our website purchase the book Elie Wiesel, An Extraordinary Life and Legacy, and we remind you to sign up for next week's Zoominar about the rise of anti-Semitism in France. Again, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Elisha. Thank you, Nadine, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.